Welcome to Optily Radio, your regular 30-minute dose of everything you need to accelerate your e-commerce marketing success.
Hey there, and welcome back to Optily Radio, the show that brings in e-commerce and marketing experts to give you actionable tips and help accelerate your online business. I'm your host, Nina White, and today in the virtual studio, I have Erica Salm Rench joining me. After working in enrollment management, where she focused on strategic recruitment and marketing, Erica managed a team of online marketers at the largest digital marketing company in the Gulf South. There, she supported the web development, SEO, online advertising, and content marketing teams in executing strategies, which elevated organizations to stand out and be seen amongst the chaos of the online marketplace. Now, Erica is the COO of Rasa.io, the only AI-driven smart newsletter platform designed so organizations of any size can personalize content for every subscriber on their email list. She gets to blend her love of digital marketing technology, partnership development, and customer service in order to support the incredible community of Rasa.io clients. Welcome to the show, Erica.
Thank you so much for having me, Nina. I'm so happy to be here.
Great. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background, how it is you got into digital marketing, and how you came to be at Rasa.
Absolutely. Thank you for giving all of the listeners a taste of my background. I'll just elaborate a little bit on what you already shared. I started my career in Tulane's undergraduate admission office. So that was back in the early 2000s when it was the advent of so many of these digital tools that are helping brands really take matters into their own hands with regard to automation, personalization, in some cases, no-code connectors. I dabbled with MailChimp when it was first becoming a thing. And I remember it was the cool tool that our admission office had to really reach prospective students in a meaningful way. And I did some very rudimentary segmentation using that tool. And so that was my first foray into digital marketing and, managing our website. And so it was so interesting to me that that's why I turned into the world of digital marketing more fully. And I worked, like you said, at the largest digital marketing agency in the Gulf South, where we did everything online. So front end and back end web dev, SEO, social media marketing and optimization, and basically everything online. And the one thing that we didn't do was email, because email is so hard to do in a quality way and at scale. And that's what really intrigued me about Rasa.io and why Rasa was the next step in my career, because we do email well and at scale using artificial intelligence and some really awesome tech that we've developed.
Awesome. That's great. So a lot to unpack there. So I want to kind of start out by asking you kind of a more big picture question. Sure. What do you feel like some of the biggest challenges that e-commerce businesses are facing today when it comes to organic marketing overall?
Yeah. So I think that any e-commerce business is obviously going to focus on, calls to action and making sure they're optimizing in every possible way to get people to buy their products and, leveraging smart automations to get to that transaction. But I think what's oftentimes not as thought of, and where people don't put the most time and energy in where they should, is providing value in between those purchase periods. So in so many cases, you might not have a product or you might not have a website like Amazon, right, where people are transacting 2 or 3 times a week. Oftentimes there's a lot of time span in between 2 purchase periods. So you need to provide value in the interim. Obviously, I'm biased and I believe that Rasa.io is an incredibly valuable tool. But what a newsletter in general does, whether you use Rasa or not, is help you provide value through really relevant, meaningful content to your subscribers, to your audience, so that when it does come time to buy, your brand is top of mind and people are already thinking about you because you've provided them value in the interim.
So you touched a bit on why a newsletter is so important. What do you think are some of the ways that successful e-commerce businesses are making the most of that first-party data and maybe increasing sales through their email channels?
It's not just about, getting to that purchase transaction. It's about sharing information about your brand so that people want to engage with you. We've seen some really successful brands include not just interesting content around their space, but also interesting content around, from their executive director, from their CEO about who their brand is, what their brand's doing, giving their brand a voice. And so that meaningful content, that meaningful write-up from, folks who are steering the brand in the direction it's going can be really valuable.
So we all know that the online space is very, very crowded, and there's, a lot of brands vying for competition on a ton of different channels. So what are some of the ways that you're seeing that small brands are able to stand out online in this really crowded digital sphere?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I know from our own experience, we have some great marketing folks. And there's so much content out there and people vying for, certain keywords, and the low hanging fruit are pretty much gone at this point. So in terms of, stuff that comes in on those high search volumes, it's going to be really expensive to rank for, and it's going to be really hard, incredibly hard, almost impossible to do organically. But if you have creative folks on your team who know which SEO tools to leverage, to look for those maybe medium volume tools where you could still write some good authoritative content, that's where, the hard work comes in, but the hard work is going to pay off if you can find that sweet spot. And it has to be good content, right? Because Google / the search engines know when you're just trying to keyword stuff and rank for certain things. You have to actually write good, authoritative content.
Yeah, definitely agree there. So SEO has gotten harder over time just because of the sheer volume of companies that are out there. And of course, age is a factor. So there's going to be companies that have been there for decades longer than, a new startup company that's just trying to, make their way into all of this. What is new, and I wanted to ask you about this, is all of these new AI solutions and tools that are making SEO a lot less manual and a lot more accessible to people who might be newer. I just want to hear what you think about these tools. What are some of the tools that you do recommend for small businesses who are struggling to rank at this stage?
One great place to start is a tool called SEMrush, I think they may actually refer to themselves as SEMrush. And you can do some basic searches for search volume without spending any money with them. So it's just an interesting place to kind of dip your toe in if you haven't really looked around for related keywords and phrases and seeing what kind of juice they get online. We use a tool that is really cool. It's called Market Muse, and it helps us craft our content such that it'll help us rank for a certain keyword, but not just by, stuffing it into the copy, but incorporating words that are, semantically related to the keyword we're trying to rank for, so that, Google, the search algorithms can pick up on, that we're really authoritative on a certain topic. So that's a cool one. They use natural language processing, some version of GPT-3 to do all that. But it's it's accessible. It's a cool tool. And so if it does a lot of the things that a lot of the SEO tools out there that you might know about already, but it takes it a step further by leveraging AI.
Well, that's great. So you just kind of upload your copy into that, and it'll, put some kind of tips in there for what you can change and where.
Yeah, it'll do like inline semantic optimization for you. It's pretty cool.
That's great. It sounds like Grammarly for SEO.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So with bringing in AI into SEO and content writing, we have to ask about the kind of AI, the robots that write copy, basically, and other tools that are trying to encroach and use, maybe more automation than is necessarily required, to like make it great for humans to digest this content. So where is that balance that brands should strike between the human touch and automation, especially for brands with really, small teams?
I love that question so much. So where I'm first going to refer folks who are interested in using AI in their marketing tools and sort of dipping their toe into the world of AI, a great resource is called Marketing Artificial Intelligence Institute. So they're a content hub and they produce tons of great information around tools, AI marketing tools that are accessible. You can get started with for, in some cases, not very expensive. And they also do this great job of kind of plotting the tools that they talk about on this scale. They call it the marketer to machine scale. And they kind of think of tools in this framework from level 0 to level 4. Level 0 being all marketer. There's no degree of automation. It's the person doing everything, all human inputs, all human, reviewed outputs. Whereas level 4 would be all machine, like you're just basically handing over the keys. And they pretty much talk about how all of the accessible, easy to use tools these days are more of like this level 2. It's half and half. And so in so many cases, and just like the case with, it's just the same way with AI tools in marketing, you get out what you put in, right? So we've all heard like the scary story about the chatbots that say horrible things, right? So if you're not doing the right inputs and if you're not nurturing the AI on the front end, you're going to get bad outputs. And so a lot of these level 2 tools leverage what humans do best. So the creative part, in some cases, the content creation and the inputs that humans know best. And then the AI can automate away some of the tedious tasks that come along with whatever task you're trying to execute. So in the case of the Rasa.io newsletter, for example, we help folks aggregate a ton of content from multiple different sources. So they plug in their sources from lots of different places and their own sources, their own blogs, their own social media handles, but then other tangentially related sources that we're going to pull in as those sources produce. And then the newsletter, in compiling, we compile a personalized version for everyone, but we're bringing in the metadata from all of those articles that we're pulling in. So you don't have to rewrite titles or rewrite descriptions or size imagery. You don't have to actually construct the newsletter. Instead, what the marketer's doing on the front end is figuring out the sources that are relevant to their audience. They're figuring out how to filter down those sources. They're constructing the template one time so that the design can be used in an ongoing manner.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So that's a really great way of kind of bringing in the technology to take out all of that really tedious and time-consuming work and repetitive work. I mean, a lot of marketing is just copy pasting, honestly.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Yeah, that sounds really great. So you had mentioned, that it's great to have an email as kind of that in-between reminder of your brand and your products and your offerings. So how is it that, it's not just another email in someone's inbox that's just, kind of glanced over? And how is it that you can avoid, hitting the spam folders? So like, what are some of the tactics to make an email stand out and not hit spam?
To break your question into 2 parts, what I'd say the first way in which you can stand out is not include just your content. So whatever space you're in, if you're a pet care product company, for example, obviously everyone who's subscribed to your list likes animals in some capacity, right? So potentially you could send in the interim, in between your blasts about your sales and your products, you could send some enjoyable content about pets or animals or like fun-loving animal stories in your newsletter. And it doesn't have to be all content that you produce. And that way people can start to not only have a regular engagement with your brand in between when they need to, buy the fancy dog leash that you're selling, but they can derive, value that they wouldn't otherwise. Mm-hmm. Getting into someone's inbox is another question. So you always want to be thinking about deliverability. We try to keep our templates as lean as possible. We make sure that our link tracking is as lean as possible. We authenticate our clients' domains. We follow all of the rules that Google and the inboxes, set out for us, but they're always changing the game. So we do our best to adapt, but you, at the very least, you want to consider your email sender's reputation and you want to authenticate your domain. And those are going to be the two most bang for your buck sorts of things that you can do from a deliverability standpoint.
Do you find that partnerships are often really fruitful when it comes to increasing open rates? So, for example, that dog food company that you mentioned, if they partnered with an animal shelter or something to kind of deliver some of those feel good stories, is that something that you think works really well in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's just another reason to interact with your audience, right? And you actually don't even need necessarily a formal partnership to do stuff like that. I mean, if you want to pull in content from a source that's publicly available via an RSS feed, or content that the source is tweeting out, the articles that they're tweeting out, as long as you give attribution back to that source, you can include it in your newsletter in the same way that it would be okay to share it on your Facebook page.
So all this talk about newsletters and why they're so important. So a new brand is not going to have an email list to really email anyone with. So what is the strategy for a new e-commerce brand that is yes, okay, you've convinced me, I'm going to start an email newsletter, but I'm starting from zero? How do they get some subscribers to sign on?
Well, one of the things that we did way back in the day is we made our newsletter sign up super prominent. So our newsletters theme wasn't necessarily just all about Rasa.io. Our newsletters theme was read about the latest in AI and marketing. And that's a hot topic and people really are interested in that. And did we, of course, send out content about Rasa.io sometimes? Sure. But the newsletter was also a rich source of information about AI tech and AI and marketing. We made it really prominent on our homepage. We made the newsletter sign up really prominent in our navigation. And, when people are committing to a newsletter sign up, they're much more likely to commit to that when they know that they're not going to be bothered all the time with asking about a purchase or a transaction. If you have a newsletter where they know that it's not going to necessarily be an ask every time you email them, but instead of be a give, then it's a great way to develop your list and develop some of that brand awareness.
Do you find with some of your clients that things like, spin to wins, where it's give us your email and you get, some kind of random discount, either 10, 15% or a free item or something like that works?
Yeah, I think that we've seen our clients do all different kinds of offers. I think that if someone wants to engage with your brand, then you don't necessarily have to give that offer. But to your point where people are just starting out, they're new, people don't necessarily want your brand's emails. I think those tactics are always going to work. I'm a sucker for that. Get 10% off if you subscribe to that email list. Come on. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, me too. Definitely. Cool. So let's jump into a bit more about Rasa.io and how it is different from other email marketing solutions that our listeners might be using.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So there are a few ways in which we're quite differentiated. So for one, we send a personalized version of a newsletter to every single subscriber that is on your list. Now that's within some guardrails, right? So you're going to establish the sources that you want us to pull from. So as you establish those sources, we're going to pull in the content that those sources produce. And you can even filter down those sources and say, okay, I want the Harvard Business Review to pull in, but only if it touches on content related to marketing or pet food, for example. But we develop this really rich pool of content for the AI to choose from when it makes recommendations. And then everyone gets a personalized version. You can always also say, I want everyone to receive a blog when I publish it. And so the AI and the personalization is one way more differentiated. But then the second piece of it is that we're an incredibly powerful curation platform. And we do curation and send all in one. So it's the AI personalization, it's the curation and send, and then inherent in those two things is the fact that we're going to save you a ton of time on the newsletter production.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds really great. And in terms of like learning how to use, everything for a first time user who's never really maybe even managed an email list before at all, like what kind of, resources do you have for brands that are starting out?
Yeah, so I would say you want to get yourself a great CRM. You want a great source of truth, and you want that source of truth that has all the great information on your customers to be able to talk to whatever other tools you're using. So in the case of Rasa.io, for example, we have native integrations with Shopify. We have native integrations with HubSpot, with Salesforce, with MailChimp, so that you can easily sync your lists between Rasa and the CRM or whatever tool you're using as your CDP source of truth.
So I think you probably already mentioned some of them, but what are the AI tools specifically that Rasa leverages to help busy marketers craft their emails easier?
So our AI is working in a few ways. For one, we have the recommendation algorithm, right? So in the same way that Facebook or Twitter or whatever social media channel you're on recommends content to you in that feed, we're going to recommend content in an email. So that's one way. We also use natural language processing to determine what a given article is about. So as an article comes in from Harvard Business Review, for example, we're going to quote unquote read it and conceptualize it and say this article is about sunshine or dog food or marketing or what have you. And we're also using AI for the visual aspect of our templates. We're honing in on the focal point of the image that comes along with the article to make it fall in line nicely with the other articles that we're recommending to folks. So it's actually not just one way in which the AI is working within the Rasa newsletter, but multiple ways.
Awesome. That's great. So obviously every company is going to be doing an email marketing and really all marketing with the end goal of sales in mind. So I'm sure you guys have some templates and case studies. And so just, from your experience, what are just like some, cornerstones of, emails that really generate the most sales for e-commerce businesses?
We work with the American Marketing Association, and they're obviously quite the authority on marketing and, eventually getting to that point of sale, like you just mentioned. And so they're not, an e-commerce company in the traditional way, of course, but they support many companies along those lines. And they knew that they needed to rethink their newsletter, rethink their outreach, rethink their engagement with all the e-commerce companies that they work with. And so they came to us so that they could intelligently aggregate all the most relevant content in the marketing space so that for the e-commerce folks, they can get content about e-commerce. And for the graphic designers, they can get content about graphic design. And for the SEO folks, they can get content about SEO. So, not exactly, a traditional entity, but they do some really cool stuff with their newsletter, and they're a client that we're very proud of.
Awesome. That's great. Well, this has been chock full of amazing information on email and more, but unfortunately we are out of time for this episode. So I want to end on the question that we ask all of our guests. And that is, if our listeners come away from this episode with just one thing that they can implement today to accelerate their online business, what would that be?
If you are not providing a regular touch point with your brand in between people's purchase periods, you must do a newsletter. because it is a great excuse to communicate with people who have already expressed interest in your brand in some form or another. And a newsletter doesn't have to take that much time. And so whether or not you use Rasa.io or another platform, it's definitely to your benefit to engage with your audience members on a more regular basis.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Nina. I really appreciate you having me.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Optily Radio, Accelerate E-commerce Marketing. We're, of course, brought to you by Optily, the new Shopify app that's revolutionizing how store owners manage their ad spend across Facebook, Instagram, Google, and YouTube. If you're one of the millions who is struggling to know where to spend your marketing dollars for the most impact, try out Optily free for 2 weeks. Watch your returns increase, hours open up in your schedule, and achieve your business goals fast. Learn more at optily.com. We'll catch you back here next time on Optily Radio for more expert tips on growing your online store through marketing. Take care.